Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ALBA webinar on the challenges and opportunities for neuroscientists in the MENA region. So the panel discussion will be captioned live in English and Arabic, and you may view the live transcript by clicking on this link that you should have normally received in the Zoom invitation or confirmation of your registration. And as you can see, the QR code on the top right corner of the interface allows you to view the transcript on your mobile phone. The live transcription is machine generated, and so the accuracy of the transcription depends on many variables, and we apologize in advance for any mistakes in the translation.
Okay. I guess I'll start. Hello, everyone. My name is Dipesh, and I'll be co-hosting this webinar along with Hilal and Hala. Okay. Before we start, I will give a brief introduction into what the ALBA network's about. What are we about? So why was ALBA created? So ALBA, as some of you may be wondering, right, means sunrise in several languages, right? And it relates to this recognition that our scientific community is beginning to acknowledge the importance of incorporating diversity and ensuring equity in the way we deal with science. And how do we ensure this diversity and equity? For example, we challenge certain issues. For example, you can see some examples on your screen, things such as implicit bias and discrimination, issues with mums or parents, new parents, penalties in terms of being parents, how that can impact their ability to continue their research, region-specific intersectional challenges, and then of course this actually lack of training and networking and mentoring opportunities in resource-limited countries. Okay. So in order to tackle these questions, ALBA's mission, as you can see on your on the slide here, are severalfold, right? So we try to share best practices to counteract bias, right? Recognize outstanding contributions to science and diversity. The idea is also to provide networking and mentoring opportunities, and also to support career development of members of underrepresented groups. Okay. And see here, there's sort of four ways. How do we do it? Four ways that ALBA tries to tackle these issues. So, and I'll go through and briefly touch on some of these awareness and advocacy, data resources, visibility, and networking. Okay. So, for example, the ALBA Declaration on Equity and Inclusion was launched at the SFN Global Connectome meeting in 2021. And the declaration is a resource for concrete, positive, evidence-based actions, right? That individuals and organizations can take to promote equity and inclusivity. And the declaration focuses on two factors, right? Specifically, implicit bias and workplace culture. And you can see the numbers. We have, and hopefully growing, numbers of organizations that have signed on to this, and also individuals, right? From 44 countries so far, and growing. One of the examples of or ways that we address region-specific challenges is through webinars such as today's, for example. So you can see an example here of networking events we had in 2021, right? So in blue, events that we've already done in Southeast Asia, in Central Europe, Western Europe, Latin America. Today in green we have our webinar, right, for the neuroscientists in the MENA region. And then hopefully soon we'll have an upcoming webinar discussing issues in Africa. Okay, and that'll be posted soon. Things are organized. You can also learn more about stuff on our website. So you can, if you're interested in topics such as the parent penalty in academia, the gender diversity gap in prizes, women in STEM history, and many more. Right, we have these links, so you can, if you're interested, you can look up and go here. We also have awards that we give. So, for example, the ALBA FKNE Diversity Prize highlights scientists and groups that have made contributions to promoting equality and diversity in brain sciences. And then we have two names of professors who've won, Prof. Erin Schumann and Marion Joles in 2020 and 21. We have also the diversity access grants. This is to offer waivers of registration for participants. And more recently, we had the ALBA Elsevier lecture in brain sciences. And this, we just did recently, recognizes outstanding research achievements of active scientists in countries, working in countries at the frontiers of brain research, where these countries are underrepresented amongst sort of neuroscience publications, right? We also have, and I urge you guys to check this out, the ALBA Diversity Podcast, so where we have conversations with a whole diverse profiles of scientists who have, for example, emigrated from their home country and then become minorities in their work country, and they discuss their life journey. We also have a smaller series of interviews where, again, diverse set of scientists have been, interviewed, talked about their journey, and there's a lot to learn. And you'll have listened to scientists on a junior level to senior level. And we have events and panel discussions on how to, related with inequities in academia, for example, or gender issues in science. These are some examples of events we had in 2020 and 2021. And you can find other events coming up again on our site. I'm sorry, I'm just quickly rushing through. We also, these are examples of partners we have. So we have our founding partners, FENS, EBRO, and SFN. We also have supporting partners with the Lundbeck Foundation, and these are lists you can see here of sort of international collaborating organizations. And we hope this will also grow. Now, how can you get involved? And this would be, really great if you can, sign on to the ALBA Declaration on Equity and Inclusion. Join ALBA, it's for free, become a member. And you can also initiate new projects, activities, send us interesting data, examples of best practices, host ALBA events at your institution, become a mentor, share your experience, and you can follow your tags, tag your social media outputs related to what we're interested in along these links. But ultimately, this will help us, put forward this idea of ALBA with, in regards to equity and inclusion within the neuroscience community globally. Okay, so that's it for me for now. I think, Hilal, you have something to say, and I will just unshare.
Thank you very much. I would like to just start by welcoming everyone, and also by thanking the ALBA team and leadership for all their work to organize this event and extend the activities to the MENA region. Just to follow up in Dipesh's introduction of ALBA in their effort to promote sort of diversity and inclusion, I always like to start by a quote that reminds me what ALBA is all about. And this is a quote from Jane Silber about diversity and inclusion, where she says that the difference between diversity and inclusion is being invited to the house and being able to rearrange the furniture. Another version is this quote is that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being invited to dance. In ALBA network, the house is always open for you to join the party. You are encouraged to dance, and they love to hear your ideas about how to rearrange and remodel the furniture. So I'd like to start on behalf of the ALBA team to invite all of you to join ALBA, share your thoughts and ideas, and again, help us rearrange the furniture and remodel and expand the house for others. An important aspect of promoting equity and diversity and inclusion in brain research is to increase the visibility of the research accomplishments and contributions of underrepresented groups in the field of neuroscience and brain research, including those in developing countries, many of whom are not only outstanding scientists, but also great role models and inspirational leaders, working to address important questions and problems in neuroscience and challenges that are specific to their communities and often neglected by researchers in the Western world. One of the primary missions of ALBA is to create the space and forums to recognize and value their contributions, to give them the credit they deserve, feature their work, and amplify their voices, to enrich the diversity of our community and make sure that we all benefit from their ideas, expertise, and resources to advance science and brain research. Today, we have the great pleasure to have with us in this webinar a group of inspirational scientists from the Middle East and North Africa region. I have personally had the pleasure of working with all of them and to see firsthand their work, in excellent work in their field, but also their dedication to advancing neuroscience research and training the next generation of scientists in their respective countries and institutions. During the next hour, we will have a very engaging discussion where we will have the chance to learn more about their work, their personal journeys, and they will share with us their thought on some of the challenges, but also the exciting opportunities for neuroscience and brain research in the MENA region. Before we start, just to highlight a couple logistical points, I'd like the speakers, when you speak the first time, just briefly in a few words, remind people of your name, your affiliation, and briefly your work. So for those who have not had a chance to read your bio. And for the audience, please feel free at any time to pose your questions or share your ideas in the chat. And the chairs are constantly monitoring that and will make sure that your views are brought up to the attention of the speakers and the audience. With that, I would like to hand sort of the mic to Hala to start the session. Thank you very much again for being with us today.
Thank you, Hilal, for this wonderful introduction. My name is Hala Darwish. I'm currently an associate professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I recently joined this fall, and where I've actually, this is the university where I graduated, where I completed my master's and my PhD. Before moving back to the US, I've been an assistant, then an associate professor at the American University of Beirut for the past 11 years, where I've actually started my career in neuroscience and still continuing it as we speak. I was also the managing director of the Abu Haidar Neuroscience Institute at the Faculty of Medicine at the American University of Beirut. Now, during the coming few minutes, we will discuss the challenges and the diversity issues faced by the neuroscientists in the Middle East and North Africa. To begin with, it's worth noting that there is a scarce basic neuroscience activity in the MENA region, or what feels like scarce basic neuroscience activity in the MENA region, with a skewed focus on applied clinical science. In my opinion, the contributing factor to this could be related to disproportionate attraction and demand toward the medical sciences rather than the basic sciences. This lack of attraction and demand could be influenced by the lack of job opportunities, which does not make it very attractive for young people to follow these tracks in their university training. There seems to be a shortage of demand for basic neuroscientists. The trainees do not see clearly their employment opportunities and are more inclined to pursue clinical sciences. I will now turn to my colleagues, Dr. Samia Bensassi and Dr. Karem Al-Zoubi, to share more their experiences and thoughts about the topic. Dr. Samia, followed by Dr. Karem. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. My name is Samia Bensassi. I'm Associate Professor of Neurology at the Faculty of Medicine of Tunis and at the National Institute Mujib bin Hamida of Neurology in Tunis. I'm mainly working on hereditary neurodegenerative diseases and mainly neurogenetics. So as you've said, it's very difficult to do research, to perform research in neuroscience in our region. It's covered as a luxury because of our limited resources. So, Tunisia is a low-income country, and it's also the case for all countries in North Africa and for some of them in the Middle East. So the authorities usually think that these resources should be directed rather towards improving clinical care rather than doing research in incurable diseases, as most of the neurodegenerative diseases are. So, and to do research now in our country, we usually need funds from abroad. So we can get a lot of funding from our government because of these considerations. So it's a main limitation for research, but we are doing our best to have international collaborations and to get funding from international organizations to do research in neurogenetics.
Thank you, Dr. Samia. Dr. Karem?
Thank you, Dr. Hala. I'm Karem Al-Zoubi, currently Dean of the College of Pharmacy at the University of Charlotte, UAE, and before that, until now, as well.
I'm sorry, Karem, we cannot hear you.
Currently at the University of Charlotte, and before that, until now, still a professor of pharmacology, neuropharmacology at Jordan University of Science and Technology, Jordan. My work is in behavioral neuropharmacology, neuroscience, in the neurodegenerative diseases, related to learning and memory, and prevention and treatment of those diseases and disorders. Now, doing basic research in neuroscience in our area is really challenging. The challenge comes from the fact that you don't have that many collaborators or neuroscientists around to work with. You don't have that many infrastructure. Virtually, you have no infrastructure for neuroscience. You have to establish everything you're on in your lab with limited resources. Now, add that to the fact that you have to deal with funding being skewed to more common, more tangible, I would say, probably more treatable.
Hi, Karem. People are having issues hearing you. I think your audio is noisy.
Move close to the mic, you should be fine.
Yeah, so not to take a lot of time, I think now it's really the challenge is scarcity of people with skills, collaborators, infrastructure. You need to establish everything you're on, funding being skewed to more common diseases, but it can be done. It can be done because we are all here, and we have been able to do it. We have been able to keep publishing, keep getting the funds, but it's the fact that it's really challenging, and that's where really research fairness and probably equity of opportunities, which is what ALBA is all about, is coming into play. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry we could not hear you very well, Karem, but I think you said that the scarcity and the lack of funds are the main hurdles that are faced in the MENA, but it's not impossible despite all of that.
Yes.
Okay, now we want to spend a little bit more time or a few more minutes discussing some of the issues that we as researchers faced in our scholarship. I, for instance, as someone who has worked in the Middle East for the past 11 years, I experienced firsthand some of these issues. The main areas where we experience hurdles that hold our progress are peer reviews, getting funding and awards, and the political instability. Over the years, one gets the sense that decision-making on the part of the journals is unconsciously biased against the geographic region of the submitted work. Now, of course, the comparison between well-established research that started years ago in the Western world cannot be fairly compared to the stage of the research in the MENA that has a disadvantaged starting point. The science in the region is striving and beginning to catch up with the state of science in the Western world. It feels like it's always a catch-up process for the region. Many times the foundational resources are not there, and we have to create from scratch before the research can take off. Although the rigor of the research is of equal quality. So when one sends a manuscript for publishing for what seems to be foundation, it's seen that it's not adding much to the existing literature. However, it can be specific enough to the MENA region and making it a first for the region and a necessary building block and step to build on it. to measure up with the more advanced science circulating and to catch up. Now, because of this need to establish the foundation and the grounds, the opportunity to publish in high impact journals is often not attainable, and one has to resort to low impact journals. The high impact journals seem to be closing more than opening doors to science from the region. But still, it's not impossible. As for the political instability, it affects the willingness of funding agencies to support and forces the researcher to leave the region in pursuit of not only safety, but career interest and continuity. We all know that to generate meaningful and impactful results, it takes a lifetime of work. So one cannot jeopardize years of work and career because of continuous crises. So the scientists, me included, choose to leave for safety and to ensure continuity of career. Dr. Karem, what has been your experience?
Well, I hope you can hear me well this time.
It's a little bit better, yes.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep my voice fine. Now, as I said, this is really, as you described, it's a tough challenge in our area. And it's what we are producing and sending to journals is a reflection of the resources that we have and the amount of collaboration that we can do within the area and outside with other more developed countries. And that will reflect on the editorial decisions and on the kind of editorial maneuver that we're taking when we send our work for publication or when we send our grants. So what we need in the area being really basic or being specific to the area in neuroscience could be preliminary for other parts of the world. But these info are not existing for our area, especially when it comes to clinical neuroscience. And that is where we find the market of getting the funding and of publishing, because the editor will answer first to tell you this is specific to your region, go to a regional journal. The fact that we really have limited regional journals. So it's a multifactorial issue, but again, I would go back and say it can be done because we have success stories from our parts of the world. As well, we have many who are struggling. So it's really both directions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Karem. Dr. Herzallah and Dr. Salama, the floor is yours to continue this discussion. Dr. Herzallah.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and it's a great pleasure to be amongst these, this group of distinguished scientists. There are a lot of things actually that come to mind when you.
Sorry to interrupt you, but can you introduce yourself briefly, please?
Of course. So as you mentioned, my name is Mohammad Herzallah, and I'm the founding director of the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative at Al-Quds University. I'm also a research scientist at Rutgers, and I hold visiting scientist appointments at both NYU and Harvard universities in the US. So with that, I go back to the point. There are a lot of intriguing discussions and really very important points that we need to, hash and we need to discuss in terms of neuroscience and the Middle East and neuroscience and the MENA region and how we can make progress and what is the neuroscience that can be sustainable in our region and how can we actually make proper contributions in this kind of regard to ourselves and then to the world. In light of a lot of the things that actually my colleagues just covered in terms of the disasters that we live on a daily basis across the divide and across whatever is composing our reality these days, the multifactorial, the complex system component of it as well, and the fact that we have very limited resources and almost non-existent governmental support for scientific research and non-existent infrastructure for research to start with. And with that, actually, I would like, with my colleague Mohamed Salama, to actually kind of shine a light a little bit on how can you attain funding in the Middle East. So basically, in the past 13 years since I started the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative, I can tell you that actually the contribution that is based on governmental support for my own research in Palestine is almost zero. Every single dollar, and I'm actually counting up to $2.5 million so far, that funded my research in Palestine over the past 13 years, came from sources that are from outside. Not necessarily outside Palestine, but outside of the usual channels that actually support and fund research. And in this kind of regard, this is actually, it's a causal relationship, unfortunately, between money and science. You need to have money to create science, but you need to show some progress in science to bring in money. So which one comes first? It's like the chicken and the egg. And I don't know exactly where to start and what kind of advice I can give you here, but I can only share my own experience and my own experiment, if I may call it, in this kind of regard. I would like to summarize what I want to say in 3 very quick points here. In terms of the research funding sources that I've been capitalizing on over the past 13 years, and how each one of them played to the best interest, or not sometimes to my best interest, and actually how you can capitalize on that in your, and you write your own story, because ultimately this is what I tried and it worked for me after a lot of trials and a lot of errors, actually, in this kind of regard. So, of course, the go-to arena here is scientific grants. But in order to actually be able to write a scientific grant, you need pilot data. You need a proof of concept. You need a little bit of infrastructure to show that you can, that you're capable of doing that, proposed set of experiments. You need the training. You need to be convincing. And you need to show the proper network and the proper team that actually can get this done with you. And there are grants outside there that actually would support you building many of these components. And the most important aspect of all of that, before even any proposals can be actually assembled, is to properly know how to write a grant, which is a hugely missing component and a hugely missing skill at all levels, at all layers of our academic systems in the Middle East. I can speak with confidence, and I'm sure this would be echoed in the rest of the Arab countries, not just in Palestine. So basically, we need to know how to write grants. We need to prepare the different components that would make a grant proposal successful and become a slam dunk. And then ultimately, we'll need to be able to live with failure in not getting funded, because the funding rate is really very, very, very low. And it's not because of us. Not most of the time. It's because of the whole system and because of the balance between demand and available resources. Based on this reality and all of the package that I carry with me coming from Palestine, and not just the science, but also the politics and everything else, I can tell you that actually in our world, which is the MENA region in this particular discussion, it's extremely important to search for a word that is almost dead, unfortunately, in our region, which is called philanthropy. And how can you actually get to spread the word about what you're doing, and how can you be convincing enough to people in order to support a little bit of the activities that you're doing from here and there. A few $1,000s in one way or another would actually not hurt you. Quite the contrary, would allow you to complete some of these very basic steps in order to get to the level where you can actually apply for external funding. And I can guarantee you'll find a lot of good people out there, but in order for this to be accomplished, you need networking. And again, another really basic skill that I think every scientist who's working in the Middle East and North Africa should be very well trained on. And again, there is no one way to do that. There is no right answer. You need to study your environment, you need to study what actually you're doing and work accordingly. And last but not least, and actually I'm going in that direction recently, is academia-industry partnerships. If you're doing research, it's not just for the sake of, the end product in our region, at least, should not always be the paper, the publication, the knowledge. We should always think about the next step. And I'm actually complementing this discussion with my background as a medical doctor, which was my first degree. And I can tell you anything that I do in terms of research that doesn't get to translatable utilities that can be used by patients, in my point of view as a medical doctor, is not really very useful. So this is another way to think about it. What are the tools that are going to be the products of your research? And how can you find the proper industry partner with deep pockets? Because almost all of them come with deep pockets that could actually make your research agenda and research ideas much more viable. So again, I'm just supplying with questions rather than answers in this kind of context, and I look forward to telling you more about my own experience. Back to you, Hala.
Dr. Salama.
Thanks, Hala and Mohammad. First, my name is Mohamed Salama. I'm currently Associate Professor at the American University in Cairo and Atlantic Senior Fellow at the Global Brain Health Institute in Trinity College Dublin. I would agree with Mohammed's opinions, but I would say that we have several different stories in different countries. This could highlight the diversity even within the MENA region. So I would say, for example, that the funding availability is maybe in other countries, like personally in Egypt, I'm experiencing good funding from governmental sources. This might be shocking, but this is happening. In fact, my latest funding that has been moved to Mansoura University reached to around 30 million Egyptian pounds. So this is considered a huge fund. So yes, in some countries we have good funding. But the problem here, I guess, is not the money, but the infrastructure. So the main challenge is how to use the funding available, how to make the best use of money. So this is the first point. I guess also, even with limited funding, there is an opportunity through international collaboration. So when Mohammad mentioned that whether how to start with good science or recruiting funding and to submit or propose certain proposals, you need high quality of research. You cannot get this without funding. That's true, but you can start by international collaboration. I guess most of us had already their PhD and maybe even their postdoc in your Western countries. So why not seizing this change, starting international collaboration? And actually, this is my life story. I started my first funding opportunity through working with my PhD supervisor in one conjoint proposal, and here it started by producing science, producing even pilot or preliminary data that support follow up with more funding and so on. So I guess it is doable. We can tackle the challenges. The local funding is improving when we compare the funding opportunities in the Middle East to the 10 or 15 years earlier. I guess the situation is improving. The possibility of international partnership and collaboration is expanding. Many of the programs now are looking at diversity and understudied population. So there is an opportunity to seek funding through collaboration with European or American partners. I guess this could be a good start. However, it is not the idea of recruiting money, but as I mentioned previously, improving the research infrastructure in terms of researchers and in terms of even the machines, the equipment, and the expertise. So I guess those are the important points we need to think about when we are talking about obstacles for using money, alongside, of course, recruiting money and funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salama. Now, to tell us more about the challenges and biases faced by early career scientists, I will ask Dr. Elfarrash to share her perspective. Sara, Dr. Sara.
Thank you, Dr. Hala. And thank you for this initiation from ALBA. So my name is Sara Elfarrash. I'm currently an assistant professor of physiology in the Faculty of Medicine, Mansoura University, Egypt. And this is a public university because also the challenges we face in the public sector could be also different from the private university. Just to address the challenges and also maybe opportunity very quickly as an early researchers. So having a step backward, I had my PhD from Denmark. I defended my thesis during lockdown in March 2020. So when I actually started my own research and recruiting my team, it was in June 2020. Still, we are during lockdown. So the challenges maybe, overestimated due to the pandemic, but I would really try to focus in the parts that is related to our region. So referring to the point that Mohamed Herzallah mentioned during, as a faculty possession initiation, we don't get like a startup funding. That is basically people use it to produce a preliminary data so that they can ask for like a more funding. We don't have that. At least in Mansoura University, we have it like in a competitive manner. So not all people will be able to get it. I was very lucky to get one of them when I was started, but also we need to start to think about, about this chicken and the egg. People need to get a preliminary data so they have chances for applying for greater fund. Also, I think in a matter of early career researcher, there is challenges about lack of training for like a smooth transition to be like a more independent researcher, the training that is more focusing on the logistic of running the lab, dealing with the budget, what is, like the taxation system in the country, what are the paperwork that we need to keep to making like a final report. I think this is something that also, I have been doing it by trial and error, and I would have been very appreciative if there is a system or like a training that helped me doing that. Also, something that is also, I think, problematic in the public university, and maybe it is a bit difficult to change it because it is by law. A public university, at least in Egypt, only allow hiring of Egyptian citizens, which means that we are really missing this international research environment that not only useful in a matter of scientific inputs that you can get from people with different educational background, but also, it's important in developing maybe the character of the scientist, of accepting, people from different backgrounds that could be reflected in somehow at some point by accepting, maybe it's a controversial data or contradicting data on your own. And I think this is more or less the academic challenges, because on the another side, there is a cultural challenges or a social challenges. Being in an academic career or to have this decision of continuing in academic career have been, less, less attractive, maybe in the last 10 years, because we don't make too much money. Also, the public perception of being, especially a basic scientist, is not very positive. Maybe this is something that we are blamed on it, that we are not, reaching out to the public in enough ways. But usually talking about scientists, even though we have a Nobel laureate, Dr. Lashuel from Egypt, scientists always this person that is sitting in the dark, dusted lab doing weird stuff. I was also able to check that within the kids, my kids' handball teammates. I asked them, okay, guys, what would you like to be when you're growing up? So 12 kids between the ages of 6 to 8 years, they were doctor, engineer, policeman, but they were no scientist. So I think this is also something that we need to work on it as a scientist in the region, and also to reaching that to the youth or to the public, maybe using a more accessible language, maybe also, inviting people when we talk about research. I will just, go quickly through the opportunity, not to be, dark. As an early career researcher, as Dr. Salama mentioned, there is also opportunities that is direct specifically to the early career researcher. So this is one thing. I think also the fact that now people realizing that we cannot understand or treat diseases on the data that is purely produced from Europe or North American population is there. So I think doing a good quality science in our region will be interested to be shared, because they will be always, you are the first person to do that, at least in the Middle East or MENA region. Also the fact that in the MENA, we are about 650 million people that are sharing the same language. This is also in a matter of social study is a golden opportunity. You can make questionnaire without being worried about, how translation can change the meaning of the question or something. So I think, yeah, there are challenges, but I think if we work smart and hard, we can also highlight those opportunities as early career researchers.
Thank you, Dr. Elfarrash, for all this important information and experience and sharing your experience. I would like to ask my colleagues, the panelists and the audience, we can take a few questions before we move on to the next session. Any questions?
So there's a couple of questions on the Q&A. Shall we leave that to the end, or shall I bring that up now? We can have one from Asma Saeed, because it's following on from Dr. Herzallah's point about shall I read it out?
Yes,
Yeah.
So elaborating more on Dr. Herzallah's point on moving from research to industry, do you think in the near future we can see neuroscience-based startups in the MENA region?
What do you think, Dr. Herzallah?
Well, that already exists. I have some good news for you. So actually, and I think at least on this panel, 2 or 3 people can tell you more about it, including myself. And I think Hilal, you have something in that regard. But I don't think it's MENA-based, but neuroscience-based. So we can certainly kind of say that actually it does exist. You can, and it was done, that you can actually do research in the MENA region and then convert it to utilities and tools that are potentially commercializable, in this kind of regard. So it does exist.
Can I bring up one quick question? It just occurred to me. There's a lot of talk about collaborations with the West, Europe, US, but what about going in the other direction? Again, I don't know if there's an interest from there, but we say Singapore, Japan, China, India. There's some fantastic places that do neuroscience. And this is something that has inspired me to actually go and check a little bit more in terms of more sort of broader applications. But is there any information from any of the panelists in regards to that? Do we have? I mean, I'm trying to build up collaborations myself, but that's very specific for what I do. But generally, is there? Anyone can?
We had some collaboration with the National Institute of Neuroscience in Japan.
Okay, so you have some stuff going. Sorry, Samia, I didn't quite hear you.
With the National Institute of Neuroscience in Tokyo.
Okay, Mohamed, you had something. Thank you, Samia.
Yeah, and I wanted to add actually that we are currently running a collaboration with colleagues in India, especially on the front of scalability and psychotherapy and clinical trials in mental health between Palestine and India, and actually we made some progress over the past couple of years. So yes, it does exist, and I think we should really learn, especially from, formerly developing countries in this kind of regard, how they made it actually, and what was kind of the recipe. Yeah, and especially India, and I think it was, they're producing some of them amazing science that actually is being published at very large scale, and ultimately, in particular, for example, in clinical trials, the whole world should learn from India in this kind of regard.
Thank you, Tim. I think
Hilal,
yeah, if I may just add to this, I think one of the reasons most people in the region tend to look more to the US and Europe first is because there are simply more funding opportunities and resources available for international collaborations from these countries. But I think you make a really perfect point, especially now with China and Japan, that perhaps scientists in the region should think more seriously about reaching out to southeastern countries for potential opportunities. I think the potential is great there, and it has. My view is that from all my interaction, it has not been sort of explored or leveraged. So I think it's a great point and something to think about. Yes. Yeah, so there is an important good question by Professor Carmen Sandy here. I think maybe we'll get insight from, probably to hear from Sara and Samia and Karem. And that relates to Sara's comments that, scientists are to blame not reaching enough to society. And she's wondering, when we talk about neuroscience in the region, what's the density? Is there really a critical mass of scientists, and here we could even discuss basic but also clinical that cover all aspects, to be able to have a critical mass that can really advocate and do outreach or compete at a very high level. And I think, I will leave it to you, and then I can add comment at the end. And the second question is, are more scientists needed in this area, or should the priority be to support the ones that are there? So I'll let you address the one about the critical mass. Maybe I will say something about this last point. And the fact is, I think we need both, because the success, I would say, the priority is helping scientists who are in the region, because if they're not successful, it's very difficult to inspire other people to pursue this field. I'm always very impressed when I go to universities and we go to our regional schools and conferences about the level of interest and thirst in terms of people to pursue neuroscience, despite this. So I think the young people are there, but if they continue to see that their teachers, their mentors, their advisors are struggling and have difficulty, then I think we would have less people interested in the field. So in my view, that we do need both, but what is critical now is to ensure that people like you who are there get the support to be able to succeed and inspire the next generations. So maybe if you could, maybe we'll start with Samia, because, and this brings another point, having just returned from Tunis and seeing you and your team, if you could comment on two issues. One is the critical mass, and two is in the West, and ALBA has organized many of discussions to deal with gender, issues and gender disparities and things. When I was in Tunisia, I was extremely surprised that you don't have to deal with this issue, because 90% of your neurologists are women. So can you talk a little bit briefly about the critical mass? Do you think you have enough neurologists and neuroscientists to do there? And if you could address this issue, why does neuroscience, is a very attractive field, and why mainly female scientists?
Okay, so in Tunisia, we have the number of neurologists is, we have enough number of neurologists, but there are, the critical mass is still small regarding neuroscientists. So neuroscience research is not very developed. There is the exception of some institutes, like our institute, Neurology Institute and Pasteur Institute, but there are still exceptions. So we don't really have the critical mass, but the number is not very large. But thanks to collaborating with others, we could perform research. And regarding females predominant, we have a problem of diversity regarding including males in this field rather than females. So because medical science, doctors are usually females in Tunisia, up to 80% of medical students are now females. So we have a lot of problems with surgery, specialties and surgical specialties. And regarding science, the faculty of science, it's also female predominance. As students, males prefer engineering specialties, they're not very attracted to neuroscience or to medical studies. So it's also the case, I think, in the all North African region. I'm wondering about the Middle East countries. But in Algeria, also in Morocco, most of the neuroscientists are females.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Mohamed, Salama, Egypt is one of the largest countries in the region. So perhaps when discussing critical mass, it's a good place to start. Can you give us sort of some insight into the neuroscience community in Egypt in terms of diversity and numbers and level of activity?
We have here to differentiate between neurologists and neuroscientists. So if we are talking about clinicians and neurologists, those who are working in the field of neurology, I guess we have the critical mass, and we have a good distribution among male and female, and it's a perfect situation. But when it comes to neuroscientists, those who are working in labs or those who are doing research in the area of neuroscience, I think that we didn't reach yet the critical mass. But is that, as you mentioned, we have big number of population. I don't think yeah, maybe you have here 90% of neuroscientists in Egypt. So Sara and myself, not 90%, yeah, maybe 80%. That's no, I don't think at all that we have sufficient neuroscientists when we are talking about lab scientists, those who can work in the area, in vitro, in vivo work. No, totally not. I can't say that, especially although we have a lot of universities, both private and governmental, but the number of those who are dedicated to work in the area of neuroscience is not sufficient. On the contrary, yes, I would say that we have a good number of neurologists working or practice the medicine in the area of clinical neurology. This is a huge gap. We have to tackle this challenge because we have those clinicians working and dedicated in their clinics, but very, very scarce amount of research done in translation of the basic neuroscience into clinical practice, or those who can be dedicating their work and something. I guess Sara could add if she has something else to suggest.
I think the problem is getting back to the point I have mentioned, that doing basic science is not as exciting as practicing medicine, and also it not making money as also practicing medicine. So maybe, you know, in the last 20 or 30 years ago, the number of, you know, full men professors was larger than women. I think in the last maybe 7 years, people that is deciding to continue in academia and doing basic science is more women. And I'm afraid this is not because we were good enough to, you know, close this gender gap, rather than the position is getting less, you know, exciting for the man that is also having other responsibility of earning enough money because he has to pay the rent and pay school fees or whatever. So there is, you know, like a more empty positions for women to jump in it. So I think this is also about, you know, people doesn't really know, or maybe the undergrad doesn't really know what neuroscience could be done in the region. Maybe if we work on that, people would be exciting to take on this path and things would be better.
Thank you very much. And again, I encourage people to keep posting the questions. I mean, there is a question from Abdel Sattar Khalifa, you know, sort of exploring about sort of, you know, what are the opportunities, you know, if people are interested in going back in terms of what, you know, in the availability of positions in terms of faculty or scientist positions. So we talked about critical mass, and the field is not attractive to some young people, but is it also the case that the number of open positions are limited? So, you know, what are the opportunities for people to move into this field to our senior level, or to return home and pursue research in this area? So here I would like to maybe ask Karem if you can comment on this, and then Dipesh, if you don't mind to follow up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Hilal. Now, for opportunities in the area, speaking of Germany, probably countries around the area.
Can you move close to the mic, Karem?
Yeah. I'm speaking about Jordan here, but countries around are similar. It really comes back to the basic specialty that a neuroscientist has. So if he's a physician, then he has to go to athletic medicine. If he's a pharmacist, he has to go to athletic pharmacy. And that's how the positions are open. It's really by the basic specialty. And that's sad to say we don't have in the area, I would say, a position for neuroscience, a professor in neuroscience, you are really somewhere else as a physician.
Yeah. So I see the point, I think.
And you work from there, so it's really related to your thesis. And that's why we are limited as a neuroscience, basic neuroscience in the area. But opportunities are there through your original college, original study.
Yeah. It's true that it's the case that in most places, you know, there are no neuroscience department. You know, you are either part of a medical school like at AUB in Lebanon, and or you are part like you in a pharmacy, school of pharmacy, and doing neuroscience. I think the AUB, maybe Hala, it would be good if you could say a few things, because the AUB has been one of the few, American University of Beirut, one of the universities in the region that have been very successful in attracting a lot of young people in neuroscience to come back to the region, you know, before these last sad events, and also senior prominent people, you know, like your dean and others. Could you, and I know that there, you know, some of the resources were still limited. People were still able to stay active by maintaining their link to their mentors and things. But what was it, what is it there that sort of attracts people to come back knowing all the challenges that we just talked about, and sort of at both in early and late stage of their careers?
Yes, I guess at that time, the attraction was the ability to have a supportive administration that actually was willing to support the scientists to come back and to give them the resources, at least in terms of infrastructure, to actually build their labs and build their work. So I know for a fact that for my own lab and the lab of my collaborator, we were supported by the administration, by the dean, to actually get the equipment that we need and get some startup funding money, so that we can actually start the research and get things and launch what it takes. Of course, we had to keep our connections with the external funders and our collaborations going, so that we can move quickly. But the support of the university and the support of the administration in terms of facilitating resources and what is extremely important. You know, if you don't have the support of the university and support of your administration, it becomes harder to actually, it becomes less attractive. So it's like moving to any different position. You want to know that you're going to a place where, even if it's not well established, you will have the support to establish things. There are certain things that you cannot do on your own, that you need the backup for it. And that was appealing at the time, because the administration was actually investing in growing these departments, and the labs and everything was renovated, and we had the resources and the support and the grounds to go and do it.
Dipesh, you are now part of sort of this recently created branch campus of New York University at Abu Dhabi, and you know, UAE, like some other countries in the region, are endowed with a lot of resources for research and funding. Could you just give us a sort of an overview of the neuroscience landscape at the UAE, current and maybe future plans? And
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And actually, some of the things colleagues here have been saying, including Hala, you know, it resonates a lot. So our general neuroscience environment is quite limited, in the sense that within the UAE there are not many neuroscientists at all. In fact, I've not met really any neuroscientists that I can really communicate with. And part of it is actually it's very hard to try and do neuroscience. I know colleagues now or in other fields, scientists in other fields in the other local universities, the support to set up, say, if you want to do animal work, is very, very, very hard. There's no infrastructure, or if they say they will develop the infrastructure, they keep changing their minds. And if you want to do work with animals, I don't know, say, you want to use ketamine, xylazine ketamine to do anesthesia, knock out your mice. It's hard to get, a license. We've been lucky at NYU Abu Dhabi because there's this government sort of push to build up research within NYU using NYU model as one of the approaches. There's a lot of support there, and it's not just the government. It's just that NYU brought in various groups of people to ensure these things, that we have people who can interact with the government to make sure these things happen. The issue is that I have a physicist friend at Khalifa University in Abu Dhabi. He's saying, for example, they've slashed the funding for postdocs. So he had a postdoc now who had to leave because he couldn't do, But so again, the support for research generally, neuroscience was quite limited overall in the UAE. There aren't many neuroscientists. And even in NYU, I'm just one right now. We have Claude, a visiting faculty from NYU New York, who has a lab here as well. We're hiring one more person from Japan. It's still a work in progress right now. But it's essentially the trying to get over the bureaucracy to try and set up a lab, and especially for neuroscientists interested in, these are the people who are going to, if they want to do systems level biology, network neuroscience, you want to do animal work, you can't come and do it here. So that's impacting that research here in the UAE.
I think this, many of the lack of critical mass, the lack of infrastructure, I think to me, sort of underscores the critical importance of people in the region to stay connected, work together, support each other, and explore collaborations. We've talked a lot about collaborations with the West, but perhaps, within the region, I know sometimes there are challenges in doing this, but I think the first step perhaps is to stay connected and continue to figure out ways to support, because to some extent, mobility within the region is much easier for many students than getting a visa to Europe and getting a visa to the US. So I think this is something, and maybe we can talk about later whether we can work through ALBA in terms of keeping, what ways we can work to keep this community connected first together and supportive of each other. And I think this is something we want to explore. We have the pleasure to have with us Ozgun, who is a former student at the EPFL and now a PI at LMU in Munich. And he raises one very important point that I would like to get your input. And if Ozgun, if you can hear me and you would be willing to speak, I would love to hear from you more details about what you have just mentioned in the chat. And he has a question, he says, and the idea there is, given the lack of resources in the region, shouldn't we think more strategically about research focus, right? If we know that it's very difficult to do animal work, or there are no animal facilities, shouldn't we prioritize research that demands less resources? And he highlights the points that I'm guiding a few master students in Turkey for computational research. Wouldn't be a good idea to focus MENA research in computational analysis? The infrastructure gap does not exist when you focus on data analysis, in my view. That's his statement. And I completely agree with this, because in the West, we're generating more data than we can even handle. And in the past, a lot of this data came in a very disorganized way. But now with all the journals and all the funding agencies standardizing things, requesting that people deposit things and make them accessible, this is, to me, is really a treasure box for people who are in the region. So I would like to hear maybe from you and then from others, whoever, maybe Mohammad Herzallah and Mohammad Salama, and that sequence, and your thoughts on these. And Ozgan, if you're prepared to say a few words in your experience to share with us, that would be great once they finish. So can you, Dipesh, comment on this?
Yeah, so there is actually a move, and also actually within our department, for example, who we are trying to hire people who are doing more computational biologists. Part of it is because of, well, there's other factors, space limitations until we build the next building, what have you. But within the UAE, there is that move for better data, emphasis more on data science and developing or promoting that area of work. And that is in part, and in fact my colleagues who are working not so much necessarily in neuroscience, but they don't have the facilities to do experimental work, this is where the emphasis is being moved towards now, sort of say genomic analysis and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that is happening, including for us in NYU, Abu Dhabi. And I agree, I think that, well, there's, we need data scientists, we need people who have the skill set to to develop these tools. So yeah, that is something that is
So Mohammad Herzallah, have you guys with the Palestinian Neuroscience Initiative, or have you tried to do something on this?
I am a computational neuroscientist by training, and this is how I started. This is basically exactly how I started. All I needed was a computer. No funding, no data, no ethics committees, no nothing. Just basically all you need is a computer and the ability to work on a computer. And actually that's the point. It's not just having the computer and which is readily available. It's basically what kind of research do you want to do, and what is in demand, and where can you leave impact. And in my case, it was the field of cognitive computation neuroscience, machine learning, AI-inspired cognitive models, mental health, psychiatric diagnostics, prediction of response to treatment protocols. So yes, absolutely. That's basically, you just told the story of my life, Hilal, there in this kind of regard. And I believe that actually this is the best way to go. And ultimately we need to be also very cognizant of the world that we live in. Data is more valuable than oil these days. And it's certainly something that we need to think about, and not just in the context of working on data that comes from outside, but also we don't have any form of infrastructure to perform any kind of or answer any kind of questions about our own status. So basically, let me give you an example. What is the prevalence of depression in Palestine? What is the prevalence of depression in Egypt? Just as two examples. There are very limited databases in this kind of regard. So it's just not just about the ability to utilize these data sets, but if you learn, and if actually the masses are trained in terms of scientists on these approaches, this, as a byproduct and an immediate consequence, people will start thinking in an organized manner about their own realities and implement that in their own realities. So yes, absolutely yes.
So Dr. Mohamed Salama, I mean, there's a huge, the youth in Egypt, and make up a large percentage of the population, but also within the universities, there's a huge interest in computational science. So why not leverage that interest to stimulate more interest in neuroscience and to develop vibrant research programs based on this?
Well, I certainly agree that working on data and data analysis would be more appealing, guided that the gap is already huge in other aspects of research. And in data, you don't need a lot of infrastructure compared to other types of research. However, I have to disagree, because my main concern would be that focusing on working on data, because we can do that since we don't need huge infrastructure. This will lead to allocation of most of our resources, and maybe even our potential students or scientists to this direction, later on we'll find out that the gap, which is already large, will keep enlarging. And then we don't have enough infrastructure for other types of research.
But maybe a way to look at this is that, you know, we are in an engineering school here at the EPFL in many places, and we don't have to divert people to computational, but the people we find in engineering and computational are very much interested in neuroscience. You know? So the idea is not to cause further imbalance, but how to attract scientists from other fields who originally are not in neuroscience, this to scientific, to problems in neuroscience. I think it's something, you know, we should think about more, because I think this is another idea that came up today. Ozgun, I don't know if you can step in and just tell us a little bit more about what you're doing in Turkey. Can you unmute and speak? And if you have the camera, that would be great. Okay, maybe if not, somebody else wanted to comment while.
Okay.
Hey, now I'm allowed. Sorry.
Okay, good, please.
The camera is still not available, but hello, hello everyone. I'm in Germany. So practically, first of all, I had many ideas modeled by what I saw Hilal done in EPFL to open up, but now I realize as a group leader how hard it is to change the furniture when you are in an institute. So first of all, I now realize how much you've done for everyone, Hilal, how hard this is to generate. So practically what I'm doing is I have few master students that are in few labs working computational gene expression analysis, and I'm trying to guide them few trainings and other things, and few of them actually became one of my best students. So my research benefits very much from this interaction. And given right now the amount of data we are generating, and I don't see in future there will be a neuroscientist non-computational. And practically generating interactions with outside of the world and getting data, getting the astrocytes that we ignored, and looking at a collaborative lab in Turkey, in Egypt, in any other place, and designing experiments that might lead a spin-off story is very feasible. And I think we have a really good opportunity with the open science and Acuity and teaming up with the institutions so that the geographical gap will be slowly ignored and started to soon these labs can actually become a relying the geographical difference can be normalized. I see opportunity here. So for me, computational training and computational understanding creates one of the important things, because trying to close the funding gap is not realistic. But when the data, expensive data, openly available, what we need is the insight. Data is, a lot of data is there, but insights are, we need people with good ideas to dig in there. And a lot of people with a lot of ambition in the region is there. And I feel this is a place we can actually coordinate and change a lot of things.
I completely agree with you. Thank you very much for, again, being with us and your input.
So I guess now I will leave the floor to you, Hilal and Dipesh, for the second part of the webinar.
Maybe I'd like to move to two other topics. We've talked a lot about challenges, but I know from many of you that there are many exciting success stories, for work that actually has been able to accomplish and make important international contributions despite all the challenges that we face. So I would like each one of you to think about one or two stories that sort of you're proud of, or success stories that you've been able to achieve despite all of these challenges. And I would like to start by giving the floor to Dr. Samia, just to highlight some of the important contributions that her team in Tunis and neurogenetics have made to the fields of neurogenetics and Parkinson's disease. And I think some of this story and many others highlight the tremendous scientific potential and unique resources that exist in this part of the world that if harnessed properly and through collaborations with groups outside could really help advance the field tremendously. So I'll give you the floor, Samia, to share your slides, and then we'll ask everybody to share their stories.
Thank you, Dr. Hilal, for the kind introduction. So I'll talk about the experience of the Munji bin Hamida National Institute of Neurology in Tunis about the hereditary neurodegenerative diseases. So in Tunisia, we have a relatively high prevalence of hereditary neurodegenerative disorders. There are several factors that could explain this fact, and particularly the rich genetic background due mainly to the mixed ethnicity, but also to the high rates of consanguineous marriage, up to 30%, which is also the case for the other countries in the MENA region. And it's, of course, an important risk factor for autosomal recessive diseases. So a lot of work has been done since the 1970s in the National Institute of Neurology in Tunis on these neurodegenerative disorders. And several new diseases have been identified, such as the Tunisian Duchenne-like muscular dystrophy, the juvenile amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ataxia with vitamin E deficiency, LGMD2I, and more recently, the LAC2 phenotype, as well as the GBA2 ataxia phenotype. Up to 15 loci have been also identified, and several new genes related to these diseases. So I'll talk briefly about three examples, and to be concrete. So the first one is about the LGM, which is referred to currently as the LGMD5, which is an autosomal recessive form of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. So in 1983, Munji bin Hamida found several families with a severe childhood muscular dystrophy, looking like Duchenne myopathy. But unlike Duchenne, which affects males, as it's an X-linked disease, this disease affects both sexes equally, males and females. And Munji bin Hamida was collaborating with Michel Fardou at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris. And he could develop, thanks to this collaboration and also to an European funding, muscle biopsy techniques in our lab. And on the muscle biopsies of these patients, he found characteristic features of muscular dystrophic muscle. So he thought it was a new disease, an autosomal recessive form resembling Duchenne disease. But at that time, many didn't believe it. They thought it was simply cases of spinal muscle atrophy, which is another disease with a quite similar phenotype, but an autosomal recessive affecting both sexes. And in spinal muscle atrophy, on muscle biopsy, it's rather neurogenic, but sometimes it can pseudo-myogenic. So they thought it was not really a new disease, but later on, genetics have confirmed that it was a new disease and have proven the team right. And Kamel Ben Othman linked this new disease, which was called the Tunisian autosomal recessive Duchenne-like muscular dystrophy, to a new locus on chromosome 13. And it was also a collaboration between the National Institute team with a team in the US led by Alan Roses. And then the mutations were identified, causing this disease were identified in the gamma sarcoglycan gene. And here it was also a collaboration with a team in Japan, Professor Ozawa's team in the National Institute of Neuroscience in Tokyo. And And this disease turned out to be prevalent worldwide. It's rather frequent in Tunisia, but also in all North Africa, but it's present worldwide. Here is another example. It's about AVID, it's ataxia with vitamin E deficiency. So in our institute, we found several families with the ataxia, with the Friedreich's ataxia phenotype, and linkage analysis was performed in these families. And in some of them were not linked to chromosome 9, which is where the locus of Friedreich's ataxia is. And these families were associated with a severe vitamin E deficiency. And then these disease, looking like Friedreich's ataxia with this vitamin E deficiency, was found to be linked to a new locus on chromosome 8. And then the gene causing this disease was found, identified, and it was caused by mutations in the alpha tocopherol transfer protein. So it's due to a founder mutation, 744-A mutation. It's a founder mutation in North Africa, but this disease turned out also to be present in all the Mediterranean region. Also, there are some cases reported in Japan and also in Italy, in Sicily. So it's not only a disease found in only North Africa. And it was important to identify this new disease because when we give supplementation with vitamin E to these patients, we have a dramatic clinical improvement. So it's one of the rare curable causes of hereditary ataxia. So it was very important to identify this new disease. And then finally, we've also studied PD, and we observed a large number of familial PD cases in our country. And we thought at first that it may be caused by autosomal recessive mutations because of the high consanguinity, but it turned out to be related to an autosomal dominant form of PD, which is the LAC2 related PD. So in these familial cases, and here it was also a collaboration with Professor Farah's team in Mayo Clinics. And we found that 40% of these familial cases had a founder mutation, the G2019S mutation. But what was unexpected is that even sporadic PD patients had this mutation in 30% of cases. So it was a very important finding, and the study featured on the cover of the Lancet Neurology because it has a very important conceptual implication, as it made idiopathic PD and familial PD very close. And now we are routinely screening for this mutation in our PD patients in our lab. And we've worked a lot on the phenotype, and we found that the LAC2 PD phenotype is similar to idiopathic PD regarding motor and no motor, as well as no motor signs. And it's very important also to have identified the frequency of this disease in North Africa because it helps in understanding the pathophysiology of PD in general, and also because maybe it can lead to neuroprotective therapies, for instance, with using, for instance, the LAC2 inhibitors. So to sum up, and I think what made this experience successful, in my opinion, is that it was based on collaborations between neurologists and scientists, international collaborations with a win-win relationship, or horizontal relationships rather than vertical ones. And also, it's very important to have a technology transfer. So nowadays, for instance, patients in our country can benefit from a prenatal diagnosis, and of certain of them benefit from curable treatment, as with AVID. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samia. we see quite a lot of increasing interest from funding agencies and others to start to, conduct or extend the research to, countries, underrepresented groups. The Michael J. Fox is actively now in this area, opening grants to people from different parts of the world. And sometimes people, when they look at, sort of maybe the MENA region, or they look at other developing countries, the perception is, there is no more science to be done there. I mean, there is the issue that there are problems that are unique to the local populations, but some of these problems also present some unique opportunities for research globally. So I was going to ask, Samia gave us one example of this, and I was going to ask if maybe Sara and Mohammad, Salama and Hala, if you can, briefly cite some of these potential examples of problems that you feel in your field that, could only be addressed, sort of in your country or the MENA region, and would add tremendous value to the field. Sara, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think one of the problem, and maybe Mohamed Salama can talk about it better than me, that for Parkinson's disease patient, it's correlation to the use of the pesticides, for example. Some of them was banned from Europe or North America, but we still use that, at least in Egypt. So maybe because there is still no solid background about the mechanism of how it's affecting Parkinson's, this is something that we cannot study it anywhere except in Egypt, or in the regions we're still using this kind of neurotoxins. I think also when it comes to some prevalence of diseases that is more common in our area, that is related maybe to our lifestyles, cultures, habits. I think also this is something that can be only addressed in the region where it is actually happen.
Thank you very much. Mohammad Salama, you've been able to, and I'll come back also to Dr. Herzallah as well, and Hala, you've been able to leverage this, some aspect of the unique, opportunities within or unique features of the Egyptian population, to be able to tap into resources and partnerships with other universities and networks in Europe. Could you cite maybe some of these examples that enabled you to access these opportunities and attract the interest of scientists to what you're doing in Egypt?
Yeah, I think as Sara mentioned, I'm looking at that as opportunities. So because we have unique features, as you may, all determinants of disease and health conditions are variable across countries. So why not seize the chance and study our unique features? This will bring collaboration and money and funding and research opportunities. We've been studying the determinants of Parkinson's disease for years. We've been studying environmental factors, unique genetic factors, both on health and disease. This helped us to recruit more funding, and currently even we are studying this in a more holistic approach. So we are now running an exposome-wide association study for Parkinson's disease. This means that we are evaluating all environmental factors, lifestyle, diet, everything externally that can affect the Egyptian population, and then reflect that on internal response in terms of genetics, metabolomics, and others. I guess this was an opportunity. We started in collaboration with German partners, then it was expanded later on to other international partners. We are now part of the IPDGC Africa. And this exposome-wide study is a partnership between the AUC and other Egyptian partners in the Egyptian Network for Neurodegenerative Disease, UCL, University College London in UK, and Emory University in the States. So this is an example. Different international and national partners are interested in studying the factors and features that are unique to the Egyptian environment and setting. I guess this is a very good example of what Sara has mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Hala, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think there is also plenty of room for social. There's nothing called social neuroscience, but you know, I think, given the nature of the social interaction that happens in the region that is different from the rest of the world, some work to be done and to investigate the how this social activity impacts our brain and how we behave and how we respond to certain situations. It's unique to the region. In terms of diseases, this social interaction is extremely important. A lot of research I think would be very interesting and geared toward dyadic exploration of certain diseases. So if we're talking about Parkinson's disease, so it's not only the patient, it's the patient and the caregiver and the family. So it's so instead of exploring individual, exploring a dyad, exploring the group, the cluster, and building on this from a neuroscience perspective. Other areas I can think of would be related to trauma and mental health and response to stress and resilience that is also unique to the region. People are under tremendous amount of, at least I can speak of Lebanon, tremendous amount of stress and trauma, but still functioning. So what is it going on in the brain, and what is the protective factors and what are not? So yeah, there is definitely room for a lot of uniqueness in that region for science and understanding the mechanisms.
We have Dr. Karem Sandy with us, and now we know where the next destination would be, Beirut. So I have why not? Of course, one, maybe Mohamed, Herzallah, if you can go quickly, so highlight one example, and then we'll have to wrap up. I want to highlight a couple comments on the chat, and then I guess we'll have to wrap up.
Certainly, I'll pick up where Hala left off, which is the stress, you know, and actually, luckily in Palestine, we have been under stress for 70 years, you know, and based on that, actually, it's exactly borrowing the logic of Mohamed Salama, you know, use the disaster as an opportunity, not just to help Palestine, but to help the rest of the world. And actually, based on this, we, you know, at least we top one list, which is the list of West Asian countries of the prevalence of mental ill health, unfortunately, you know, topped by depression and anxiety. And needless to tell you, basically, this is all coming in a population 65% of which is under the age of 24, and 50% of which is women. And ultimately, the availability of medications and treatment is very limited, if any, let alone the fact that, you know, people have this debilitating social stigma that prevents them from seeing a specialist when they need one. So this created a reality for people like me in Palestine who thought about it in terms of, okay, how about we try to study and understand depression from the neuroscientific component and the molecular, the genetic component, and try to actually, you know, generate diagnostic tools, proper diagnostic tools that are to some extent objective, that would not just allow Palestinians to learn more about their own mental health, but actually can be used and generalized worldwide. And that was the whole story for the past 12 years. We have been developing very simple computer games, very simple diagnostic tools that are language and culture independent, that has diagnostic capabilities up to 95% using the research in Palestine. So with that, actually, it's we're bringing peace to the world, hopefully, you know, from a place that lacks peace, which is Palestine.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just have been, I don't want to leave people with unanswered questions. And here I'd like input from Karem briefly, if you don't mind. There is a lack of animal facilities in the region. You've been able to actually do quite a bit of research on animals, you know, as part of your work in toxicology and pharmacology. And the question is, you know, is it easy for people to access facilities in the region if they don't have one? You know, how easy is it for people to come to your place, or has been for you and others to move to other facilities to do work?
Well, actually, yeah, it is a challenge to find the proper animal facility, and actually to find an animal facility to begin with in our area of the world. Now, when I started working, there was no real animal facility, I mean, in work standards of animal facility. So we had to go from scratch and create one. Creating one with limited resources is a challenge, because you have to be creative in just creating. So now we have it, but many other places don't. So it is a challenge. But luckily, access to it is not a challenge. So the minute you collaborate with somebody in the institution, or you have a proper proposal to the institution, access is granted. It's not really very complicated process. But this advice is to collaborate with others, especially in the institutions where the facility is. That will facilitate many things. But I acknowledge the challenge in our area. Many of our countries in the region, those animal facilities, you will find a big institution, a big university, but you will be surprised that the animal facility does not exist, or it's a mini animal facility with a few rooms, and that's all. So yes.
So I will, we'll continue the discussion, but at this point we open the Q&A session and welcome any input, questions, or comments, thoughts from the audience. So please, if you would like to speak up, raise your hands. There was a question from Yahya Ali. I mean, until we have somebody raise their hands, somebody could please monitor this and let me know. There was a question about, the idea of computing resources in the region. And, I think in the GCC countries, I think there are computing resources. And in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the Qatar, they have computing institute with extensive computing resources. Countries, I think, like Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon, limited, but there are a lot of opportunities to access computing resources in other places in the world. So eventually you will need it, but perhaps to start, there are different ways of connecting to different hubs to do this. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this. Please feel free to step in.
I mean, there are actually very readily available online resources for free there that you can capitalize on, but you need to actually kind of write some routines to be able to use some cloud computing solutions that are readily available for free in their basic plans. And for some basic work that you need to do, you can just get started there. You don't need any of these, premium, very high level plans to get started there. So you can certainly, you can get started. And I also wanted to mention that I think through the Arab League, there is a program that is called ASRN, which is Arab Science Research Networks, something to that extent, where they actually build the capacity at the national level in Arab countries in order for cloud computing and other resources to be available for researchers. But I can guarantee you, if you just do a very quick search, you'll find a lot of readily available free resources online.
For me, and I think for many of you who've been actively engaged in discussing issues related to neuroscience in the region, this has been a very, really enlightening discussion and has opened our eyes to some interesting ideas that we need to pursue and I think about in terms of the strategy forward. I think the idea about strategically leveraging data and data science and mobilizing other communities to support our research, but also to help build critical mass and expand the activities of neuroscience in the region is important. The idea of pursuing collaborations within the region and other parts of in Asia, which actually many countries in Asia are becoming much more active in the MENA regions than decades and years before. And Tasia, raised a point in a comment. Asakawa, who was one of the supporters of neuroscience in the region through her position at IBRO, raises the point about the importance of having, maybe thinking of a regional neuroscience initiative that could help stimulate interest and garner support and resources to do this. A lot of ideas, I think, for all of us to think about and reflect on. And I think for the people here, let's try to think together how we can, leverage the support from ALBA and the ALBA platforms to stay connected and to continue to advance the causes of neuroscience in the region. So thank you very much. I have one final comment from Mariam, in which she raises the point that, there is one of the challenges in the region is that there are more students and postdocs than there are faculty positions or research positions. And I can tell you, this is not just a MENA problem, this is a global problem. And one that has forced the institution to even start rethinking, the career path of people we train, because there will never be enough positions for people who aspire to go, to academia or research. But there are a lot of exciting opportunities nowadays and many career paths in neuroscience. So I always encourage people to try to explore all the opportunities and not to. And there are many exciting opportunities at the interfaces of neuroscience and other areas. I would like to wrap up here with a few comments. I started talking about diversity and inclusivity, and I want to end with the point that inclusivity goes beyond, just inviting people to the party. In the case here, I think it's very important that neuroscientists globally, and in particular those who are more privileged, to do much more to help people who are in the front of these battles to promote and neuroscience and advanced brain research in such challenging environment. It's not enough to just listen to these communities and just give them an opportunity to speak. I think it's very important for us to move to give them a place in the table, ensure that they and their communities are represented in future conferences, symposia, workshops. We heard from all the speakers that collaboration is key. And in collaboration requires, having people having a chance to be visible, to feature their work, to be able to connect with others. And he talked about challenges in publishing, but also challenges in getting, opportunities to present in talks, workshops, and symposia. So I would really encourage anybody who's with us today and in a position to do that, to do everything they can and leverage your position and resources to advocate for the mission of ALBA and for these underrepresented groups, and ensure that they have equitable opportunities to advance not only their research, but this career. This is a really important step to begin to correct the current balance that we have in our fields today. And I think the responsibility is one that is collective for all of us. It's always been inspiring for me to be, with people such as members of our panelists today. I know firsthand, many more of the challenges that they did not share with us today. But what I've seen over the past 8 to 10 years that I've known each one here is that they've never given up. They've always been in the frontiers, and they devote large part of their time actually to serve others. So thank you for everything that you're doing for our communities in the MENA region and for neuroscience globally. And let's stay connected. Let's stay with ALBA. And let's keep thinking in a constructive and productive way in how to, to keep the cause and keep things moving. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest advantage of ALBA is that they give you the resources and support to create and to change the furniture and to shading. And there is a huge community of people. Almost everyone who joins ALBA joins because of genuine interest to help and support. It's all volunteer community. And I urge all of you to get to know this community much more, to connect with them, and to make good use of all the resources that they have, and also, most importantly, contribute actively to this community.